All right, good morning. We are going to complete our current study in Ezekiel, not in Ezekiel this morning, so we're not going to be in Ezekiel. Next week we'll begin the second half of this particular book in Daniel, and Brad's going to lead us next week. So back in during President Reagan's presidency, he established the day to honor the sanctity of life. As we recognize in America, that Sanctity of Life Sunday is today, 16th. Today is the Sabbath, for which most congregations throughout the nation are going to acknowledge, recognize, focus on the sanctity of human life. So that's where we're going to turn today too. And quite frankly, our book does lead us in that direction today, which I'm glad that it does. But I'm not going to really stick really close to kind of the direction that passage takes us. So to begin, I want to start back in Genesis. So if you would, turn back to Genesis chapter 4 with me. This is not an unfamiliar piece of history for us, but it is foundational history that we need to get a handle on if we are going to own this issue of the sanctity of human life. And please, if you're going to follow with me this morning, as I have done all this week as I prepare, don't just assume that you know exactly where you stand on this. Because there is a huge world amassed against the Christian stance on the sanctity of human life out there. Now, it won't come as this overt challenge always, because it'll look like attributed value of life. And we are not talking about the value of human life. That is not what we're talking about. We're talking about the sanctity of human life. That's at the level that we as Christians value life. Not at just value, but at sanctification. So as we begin, I want to take you back to a familiar piece of history. And again, this is absolutely foundational in forming your Christian worldview on which a cornerstone is the sanctity of human life. We'll begin in verse 8. Cain and Abel are the sons of Adam and Eve, and they have been asked to bring sacrifices to God. Both have brought their sacrifices. Abel of the land of his livestock, Cain of the land. Abel was a herdsman, Cain was a farmer, and God spoke to both of the boys and said the sacrifice of blood is an acceptable sacrifice, but the sacrifice of grain is not. Cain becomes very jealous of his brother. We pick up in verse 8. Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let us go out into the field." And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. First recorded murder in history. Then God said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he replied. "Am I my brother's keeper?" And the Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood and from your hand. Then, when you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer in the earth." And Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer of the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." But the Lord said to him, "Not so. If anyone kills Cain, he will suffer vengeance 7 times over." Then the Lord put a mark upon Cain, so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Now I want to start there this morning, because I want you to hear that most callous of questions that Cain asked when God asked, "Where is your brother?" His question was, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" Now, can you think of a more callous response? If you have more than one child, if one of your children killed the other child, and you called that child to account, and that child says, "I don't know, what, am I my brother's keeper?" Just let that one sink in for a minute. How callous it would be for that to have taken place. But that's not really where I want to focus this morning. I really want to focus on God's response. God's response is that your brother's blood cries out from the ground to me. I want to suggest to you that that is the first place that you hear this idea of how God thinks about human life. That the blood of your brother has been received back into the ground, and now it cries out to me. What you have done is taken someone that I made in my likeness and image, and you exercised your ability, not authority, but ability over one whom I made in my likeness and image, and killed him. Took that life that I gave, you took when you killed your brother. And then you asked me, am I my brother's keeper? I want to let that sink in for a second. So then God says, when you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crop for you. You will be a restless wanderer of the earth. I want to we don't have law yet, so it's not life for a life, eye for an eye, hand for a hand, even though we have a murder here. And God's punishment of Cain says, oh, this is more than I can bear. Because Cain understands maybe what goes over our head. Abel was a herdsman. Cain was a farmer. This is how Cain made his way in the world, was tilling, coasting, governing food from the land. That's how he made his way in the world. And God says, no, you're not going to be able to do that anymore. No matter what you plant, it's not going to yield for you. The earth will not yield for you. And unless you kind of miss the kind of the sequence of operations, you're not going to eat, period. Because the livestock that you would say, okay, well, I don't eat grain, and I eat chicken. No. That's where they get their food. You will not survive. This is why Cain says, my punishment is too much for me to bear. You will have no means of providing for yourself. Cain said, Lord, my punishment is more than I can bear. Today you're driving me from the land. Get that idea, is that you're driving me from the land. You have put an enmity between myself and the land. And I stand completely isolated from my means of survival. What I want you to see is that God has totally separated Cain from Cain's means of life. Cain says, I'll be restless wanderer of the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. The Lord said to him, not so. You're not going to die. That's the easy way out, Cain. That'd be life for life. No, you're not going to die. You're going to live. But here is the whole point that I want to try to bring out of Scripture into our understanding is that, no, you're going to live, but you are now going to live kept by another. The only way you're going to live is by someone else providing for you. Are you going to die for the murder of your brother? Your question was, am I my brother's keeper? You're going to live the rest of your life answering that question. And the question is, yes, you are your brother's keeper. You're going to live the answer to that question, because the only way you're going to live is kept by another. This is what I want you to see. This is what God is showing Cain, is not just giving him the answer, yes, you are your brother's keeper. Your entire life is going to be a testament to the fact that we all live as our brother's keeper. This is where God lays the foundational stone of not just the value of life, but the sanctity of life. So I want to go to the sanctity of life for a minute. We don't really use that language very much. The sanctification, the sanctity of life. Do we know what we're saying when we say sanctify? It's a great big, $10 Christian word. Do we know what we're saying when we say sanctify? Literally, this is not my definition. This is simply what sanctify means. It means set apart unto God. Sanctify means set apart unto God. When we talk about the sanctity of human life, what we're saying is that we're setting human life apart unto God, the one who gives life. We consider human life sacred, not just valuable. Any humanist can get to the point of saying, oh, no, I can attribute life to have value to life. But that's not where we live. Where we live is that we understand that human life is set apart wholly unto God, the giver of life. Now, on top of that, we recognize that life is eternal. We recognize that we are fallen. We recognize that we are saved by the blood of Christ. It's all sacred. All of it is set aside as sacred. It's not just the nature of life. We're not sanctified, or the life is not sanctified simply because it's human. It's sanctified because of the God who created it. Again, don't assume you know exactly where you stand on this, because unless you know why you stand where you stand, you're not going to be equipped well to share with another the difference between where we will go here shortly. Life is just time plus matter plus chance. Spinoza's meat bags. Or to humanism, oh yeah, it's the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer syndrome. It's not until you benefit the collective, you demonstrate your value in life before we give you value, because all value in life is attributed. It's not inherent. But if you can demonstrate how you benefit the collective, or more importantly, how you benefit me, then I will attribute value to your life. Now, we're way beyond that. We're at the point of sanctified life. So let's continue on for a minute. We talk about sanctity of life. Most commonly, we're talking about this time of year, what? Is it not in anybody's conversation right now? It's certainly in the news, because it comes up this time of year. Every year in the news, it comes up. I'm sorry? No, we're not talking about Martin Luther King. Yeah, most commonly when we raise the issue of sanctity of life, what we're raising is the issue of abortion. Yeah, this is the time of year when all of the chatter kind of raises to a fevered pitch. Why? Because it is consistent with the Roe versus Wade ruling, the subsequent rulings that came after that. This is one of those dated points in a calendar where discussion peaks. We peak at Christmas on the birth of Christ. We peak at Easter on the resurrection of Christ. And for some reason, in January, middle of January, we're peaking in this conversation about abortion. And so that's where this issue of sanctity of human life comes from. Now, for most people, it never even gets to the point of sanctity. It just gets to the point of value. Does human life have value? Cats and dogs don't get together and have conferences about the value of life. They kind of seem to have a handle on it. We're supposed to be the smartest ones, and yet we're still asking questions about whether or not human life has value. And when does it start? And what do we do about that? We live in a world that's horribly confused by its own means about what the value of human life is, long before we even get to the issue of sanctity of human life. And that world has the church in it, and the church has been a very, very poor voice in the sanctity of human life. And unless we offer the sanctity of human life, the sanctity of human life doesn't have a voice amongst people. That's why it's so important for us first to have a handle on this. So when we talk about the sanctity of human life, most commonly it comes up in terms of abortion, about the unborn. But honestly, if you have a Judeo-Christian worldview, the sanctity of human life doesn't stop with abortion, the unborn. It has to do with the sanctity of human life of children also. And if we live in the polite society of the Western world, but it wasn't much more than 100 years ago when child labor was common. And we valued children as no more or less than a commodity that would be tucked away in factories and industry as cheap labor or unpaid labor. And England was amongst the worst violators of this. But still, this happens everywhere throughout the world. Child labor is a vicious abuse, a vicious undermining of the sanctity of human life. But we have it on the other end as well, in the aged. In the aged, we like to think that we value our elders. But quite frankly, if you live in that middle zone, if you're in that kind of post-adolescent, pre-midlife window, most people are living catch-as-catch-can. And again, that Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer syndrome that we built. You know that one? Yeah, Rudolph, we sing this little song, we teach this little story to our kids every Christmas time. Rudolph was a very different birth Rudolph had this little glowing nose. And for that reason, he was ostracized and banished and relegated and bullied to an irrelevancy by everybody, embarrassed by his father, and only pitied by his mother. Until one night there's a crisis for which that red nose was the only answer to the crisis. So now Rudolph has a benefit to us. The collective can actually benefit from this guy. So now the one that we bullied his entire life becomes our hero because he has some way to benefit me. And that's attributed value. And yet we teach that absolutely everywhere. Not with a little red-nosed reindeer, but in almost every way we treat each other. In that kind of middle zone, every one of us went through a time of junior high or middle school where that's the only way we valued each other. We had very little value for each other that we considered inherent, certainly not sanctified. It's how you benefit me. Are you on the right team? Do you belong to the right club? Do you look right? Do you dress right? This was a part of all of our memories. Never really realizing that it was a devaluation of human life not to recognize the made and the likeness and image value that is literally breathed into us by our Creator God. And nobody's asking us, do you think you are your brother's keeper? And you're not asking yourself, or you're not holding yourself accountable to a life that exists as your brother's keeper. It's not until we're forced to come to these events in our lives, not until we're forced to answer these questions, do we begin to address or even think about what that really means. That to our right and to our left are people made in the likeness and image of God in the same way I am. And if I believe that my life has value, then I should logically conclude that others made like me, their lives have value too. And yet we don't. We don't. The unredeemed man is the highest governing authority in his own life. He sees the whole world as what it means. It's either an asset or a detriment to his life. And that's the way he lives. He doesn't think of it as vicious. He doesn't think of it as cruel. He thinks of it as the way of the world, and it is the way of the world. And that idea permeates. We're going to look at a little bit of history this morning to help us see that. But that idea permeates. The most vulnerable, yeah, they're the unborn and the elderly. Those are the most vulnerable. Those are the ones with the least voice. It is the place that we struggle the most. I represented a congregation many years ago. We get to this Sunday. It's like 25 plus years ago. We get to this Sunday, and there's not a peep from the pulpit about the sanctity of life. And so I asked one of the associate pastors after the service, I can't believe we not a word. The response was, we can't talk. We can't. Because there are just too many people in this congregation that have had abortions, and it's just too painful. That was the pastoral leadership response that I got when I asked the question. I wasn't even challenging. I was just asking. And we just can't, too painful. Well, what about all those people out there who are looking for an answer, who need to be well-grounded, who really haven't fully thought through or haven't fully formed their idea of what being made in the likeness and image of God is like? Why are we not teaching that? And I didn't say that. I was this was 25 years ago. I was practically half my age right now, and in a much different stage in my walk. But I look back upon that, still cringing. Every time I hear that voice say that, I still cringe at the unwillingness of the church to teach the sanctity of human life. It is without question. It's without question a foundational stone that will malform the entirety of the rest of your Christian walk if you don't get this one right. And by right, I don't mean your opinion or my opinion or someone else's thoughts or what the latest book says, but the way God sees human life. That's the only way it matters, because he's the author. And if we don't see each other the way he sees us, then the only way we see each other is the way each of us choose to see each other. And we live this blissfully but ignorant, arrogant, and self-contradictory, libertine life. A whole lot like the family of Rudolph. So let's look back and see what the casualty. Yes, sir. Absolutely. I'm not going to give you an opinion. If I have anything at all to say, I'm going to give you discernment. Absolutely. Just drop in the bucket. Couple of things on that. First, just the way you posed the question was future tense. How's he going to judge? I'm going to suggest to you that God is deep into his judgment of this nation already. Deep into his judgment of people. Not just this nation, but of people. Now, we'll keep it localized this nation for a minute because we have legally, as you have noted, institutionalized it. Legally, we have institutionalized the idea of abortion. Now, it's all quiet. It happens over in some building somewhere we don't know. Do you know how many abortion clinics are in the state of Kentucky right now? This is amazing. To me, it's amazing. It's only one. It's in Louisville. Yeah, one. It's in Louisville. It's not the way it's always been. There used to be a lot more, but there's only one in Louisville right now. But we're a rarity in the states of the U.S. There's a lot more abortion clinics than one in most states. There's just one here, and it's in Louisville. But it's all done quiet somewhere else. It's still, to some degree, amongst polite society, taboo. We don't just parade it, unless it's a cause, and then we do parade it. But to Joey's point, yeah, that actually, there's the passage actually, one of the passages actually describes what you're talking about, Joey. Joey is one of those, again, it's one of those underlined passages for me. It's actually got asterisks by it and brackets around it. And it says, you shall not worship the Lord your God in the way they worship their God. They do all kinds of detestable practices. They kill their children in sacrificial worship. Now, that's the specific way that God is telling Israel that you shall not worship the Lord your God in the way that they worship the Lord their God. So just to make it clear that how kind of quiet and polite society it is today compared to what God was seeing at the time that it was happening to them, it was much more visible. And Moloch was most commonly a huge bronze statue seated with its hands out in front of it. That was hollow. And in the back of this huge bronze statue was an opening that was hollow. And inside that opening, inside the body of that huge seated bronze statue of Molech, they would kindle a huge fire and get that bronze statue, literally red hot. And then all the time that this fire is being kindled, everybody is in this revelrous, drum banging, yelling frenzy. Then they would be literally circling this bronze statue that's slowly being brought to a red hot, almost illuminated state. And then it was hot enough, and the fever pitch was high enough, then they would start dropping their children into the open hands of the statue, for which they would literally burn to death in the hands of this statue. Get the picture in your head. This is how God says you shall not worship the Lord your God in the way that they worship their God. And the reason that they're marching and beating drums And in this rebellious yell, and this is my speculation, so I'm just going to offer this, is because it's the only way to drown out the screams of all those babies dying in the hands, burning to death in the hands of that statue. Now, we're not so crude. We're much more civilized. It happens quietly in a hospital room, fully covered and sanctioned by the law. It's okay. And then we justify it too, say, well, it's not really human life. We put a title on it. It's called unviable tissue mass. That's what it is. We're not talking about a baby. We're talking about an unviable tissue mass. Until you get to the point in most states, I don't know if Kentucky's one of them, that when you have an abortion in this room, you have to have a parallel suite on this side. And that parallel suite has to be prepared to save the life of the baby if suite A fails at their task. So if the attempt to abort the baby results in a live birth, but now significantly damaged, you can't kill. Now it's murder. You can't do it. So you got to take the baby over here to suite B and save the baby's life. That's how confused we are about this. Is that we set up these machinations of just labels and rhetoric to be able to take what is sanctified, set apart unto God, and relabel it as an unviable tissue mass. We do something very similar to our elderly. We just discard them. In most cases, they die not at the death of an abortion clinic, but the death of irrelevancy, having been ignored and discarded. And we do this because we grew up thinking that we need each other rather than we choose each other. Because if the way we see each other is, I'm needed by somebody and I need somebody, as soon as something else or someone else fulfills that need, then it's irrelevant anymore. You see how subjective it becomes. But if we choose the willful choice to love each other as God has first loved us, then whether or not we're a benefit to the collective, whether or not we're consuming more resources than we provide, is not an issue any longer, because we never saw each other that way. Again, we're back to looking through the eyes of God, how God looks at his creation at every stage of human life, set apart, holy unto God, first by him, and then he calls us to see human life the exact same way. And yes, you are your brother's keeper, and you are to live your life demonstrating that you are your brother's keeper. Human life is sacred because of who created it. Now, if we know a little bit about our history, I need to check here because I want to make sure that we're not too bad. Okay, this has become so culturally ingrained in us that a lot of it is really just kind of slipped through the sieve of life, and we haven't even seen how this slow boil happened. Has anybody read Darwin's Origin of the Species? I haven't read the whole thing. I've read excerpts from it. I haven't read the whole thing. It's a huge book. I mean, and quite frankly, even the parts that I've read are hard to read. But after all of this yak about his, and again, theory, evolution is not science. It's taught as science. It is packaged as science. It is published in our children's textbooks at school as science. It is thrust down your throat in our universities as science. But even Darwin, the author of evolution, did not call it science. Every single time he refers to his idea in his book, which is the Bible of the humanist, he even calls it theory. But that's not it. When he gets to the end, and this is the part that I have read in its entirety, the very last chapter is called The Conclusion, he actually says that all of the life that he's observed was created life. And it was given its life by its creator. Created and creator are his words in his text, in his conclusion of his theory about how not life began, but about how life, as he calls it, evolves. Now, this happened in the middle 1800s. At about the same time, we have a burgeoning group of German scientists who are evaluating this whole new idea of what it means to be the Ubermensch, the Superman. And this group of biophysicists come up with this idea of the Ubermensch and the Untermensch, the Superman and the Underman. And the idea that they have is that, I think that Darwin dude's got an idea here. That if natural selection creates a refinement of biological life, then what happens if we use this collective ability that we have and we start managing that? What if we genetically start manipulating and managing life? And their idea, and my German's not good, so I'm going to give you my best, was Lieber von Lieber, which is life unworthy of life. And that was the fundamental protocol for how they advanced their biological science. And what they determined was that we need to find people like Ben. Now, Ben's an educated man. He's particularly striking in his stature. He's a good-looking man, physically healthy, strong, capable, and really, this is really important, he's just a good model citizen. But Brad's missing 3 toes. He's got an ailing liver. He's particularly unattractive. He's overweight. He's unmarried, which is a good thing because he's not going to procreate. And so what we need to do is take Ben and mate him with another one like him, such the collective gene pool now becomes refined in the good traits. And then Brad will, if we can get him in a cage, we can do that. But it's easier if we just kill him, because killing him means purging his gene pool from the human race. And then we can fulfill our fundamental protocol of determining life worthy of living as separate from life unworthy of life. Now, it doesn't take long before Friedrich Nietzsche, also from Germany, built his whole God is dead idea. And you mate Darwin saying that life is just a product of time plus matter plus chance, with then the artificial human manipulation of time plus matter plus chance to create the Ubermensch and to purge the Untermensch, to create the better human. Nietzsche comes along and lets you know that God merely needs to be out of the equation, and the rise of this young man by the name of Adolf Hitler. And Adolf Hitler took that to the next level and institutionalized it and decided that there is life that's unworthy of living, and the beginning of that is all Jewish people. This is life unworthy of life, and it needs to be purged. And then secondarily, anybody that does not meet the Aryan idea of life. You see how the manufactured attributed value to human life becomes the goal, the drive, the unquestioned reality that if the Ubermensch is what we're destined for, then let's get there. Let's use the Ubermensch that is to build the Ubermensch to be us, a better version of us. Human life, the value of human life, sanctity was gone. The value of human life is now totally attributed and defined by us. And how do we define it? A particular set of traits, the Aryan traits. And so that's exactly what began in the development of the Aryan nation. And if you know that, Aryan race, and if you know that history, they were well into it. Until Winston Churchill gets a call and says that the attack upon the British Isles is imminent. And Winston Churchill calls Roosevelt and says, we have expended all the resources that we have. We are at the final hour. Will you help? And Roosevelt at that point says, no, we can't involve ourselves in this. You're going to have to fight this yourself. And so Churchill's sitting alone on his island with this fully justified, almost theologically justified expansion of a vision of a new world order built upon the Übermensch that has its origins tied all the way back into this chain that we've discussed. And this is the most amazing thing to me. In Churchill's own backyard, there's a young man by the name of Francis, and I'm going to get his, Galton. Yeah, Francis Galton. Now, Francis Galton was hard at work in England at the same time that these, what I would consider fairly vile ideologues in Germany. And Francis Galton had created what he calls eugenics. Anybody familiar with the word eugenics? You heard that word before? Yeah, eugenics is just the more comfortable way of saying selective breeding. And Francis Galton was hard at work at this, creating his theory of and practice of eugenics, which is simply the exact same thing Hitler was doing. Selective breeding. Selective breeding for the purpose of building the better man. That's happening right in Churchill's backyard, at which time he's being assaulted by the people whose fundamental war machine is built at domination and recreating the world in its own likeness and image, which is exactly what is being endorsed inside the calls of the academies in England. But it didn't stop there. It didn't stop there because this served as a means of justifying the class system in England, specifically the royal class system in England, where you take the best and the brightest that we have to offer here, and we breed them together. And a good family name is also a really great asset to you. And a little bit of wealth, that's really good too. And if you got all that, we start mating that together with people with wealth, people with family name, and people with good genes, and we're well on our way to breeding this superior class of people. And then you get into the 50s, the 40s and the 50s, mainly the 50s. And you get into this kind of whole idea of what does it take to create not just people, but a whole world of that. And in some areas it took the track of this age of Aquarius, that it's going to happen one way or the other. It was kind of the hippie track. Live and let live, man. The age of Aquarius is coming. We're all refining to one great order. Then there's others that say, oh, no, we want to manipulate this because we want to be on the side of manipulation. We want to be the ones who are emulated, who build more like us, to create this what is referred by the Preface Foundation as a just and verdant union. And that left England and came here. And if you look through almost all of the history of the presidencies since 1900, you will see that most of the presidents of the United States of America are a product of this very same thing. Right families, right education, right physical attributes, right ability to speak, as defined by those who determine difference between right and wrong. And we craft these leaders of this new world order into which we want to live. Now, here's where we have to go back to the beginning of this process to find out where the rubber hits, or where this becomes a self-consuming system. And all of this is history. This is not my opinion. All of this is documented history. You just have to know a little bit about history to be able to put these points together. This is all history. We've been doing this to ourselves for all, and guess what? We're a Judeo-Christian nation, and we bought it all. We've been grooming and developing and building this inside our own nation for years, for decades, for over a century. We've been doing this exact same thing. And here's the I guess where I want to get closer to a close here this morning. Natural selection was the method that Charles Darwin coined when he talked about what he felt he observed in nature. That stronger traits survive, weaker traits don't, to the best of his definition of stronger traits, and weaker traits. And that systematically they purge themselves. And so he calls it natural selection. And natural selection was that's good. That's a good thing. It's coined, it's packaged, it's put in a box, and it's put on your Sunday morning breakfast table. It's easily digested as a bowl of Cheerios for common people to talk about, to fill our minds, shape the way we think. The natural selection is the way of the world. And let me tell you, it's not natural selection. Focus with me here for a minute. What Darwin proposed in his theory of evolution is not natural selection. It's natural rejection. You see, the weak, they didn't just naturally select themselves to die and purge their gene pool from existence such that the strong would survive. No, that's not what Darwin observed. That's not what Darwin documented. That's not what Darwin taught. That's not the theory. The theory is that the strong took the strength that they had to kill the weak for the purpose of purging the gene pool. It's a natural rejection of the strong, not a natural selection of the weak. The weak did not select the strong to survive. The strong selected the weak to die. And that's his theory. That's not my opinion about his theory. That's his theory. That the strong overcome the weak. And here's where it fails. This is where the idea fails. If for any reason you include some idea of evolution in your mindset, as Charles Darwin was proposing as a theory, I'm asking you to wipe it from your mindset. The one thing that his idea of natural rejection, coined as natural selection, dies on is altruism. How do you explain altruism? And if you don't know what altruism is, it is simply the care for the weaker. It is the stronger using the gifts, the abilities, the strengths, the attributes, the assets that the strong have for the purpose of caring for the weak. And you see this throughout all of life existence. All of life existence has this. It is what we would even refer to as instinct in many animals, where the male of a mated pair will protect its den. The female of a mated pair will protect its young, will feed its young, often at its own expense. It happens everywhere. Quite frankly, you would have killed your own children long before you raised them if it wasn't for altruism. If it was simply survival of the fittest, how much of the life of your children was contributing in some meaningful way to the collective when they were 8 months old, compared to how much consumption did your 8-month-old child have when he was 8 months old, taking out of the value of the collective? And the answer to the equation is really easy. He's taking a whole lot more than he's producing, and so we got to get rid of it. And since he can't take care of himself, he doesn't have a voice, it's okay. And so we do that. But the bottom line is that there is altruism. Altruism exists. There's a fantastic book. I would highly recommend that you read it, even though it's a very difficult read, by the name of George Price. The name of the book is The Price of Altruism. George Price was an evolutionary biologist who had many, many interests. And he was trying to answer the question of where altruism comes from, because he looks out there and he sees altruism everywhere, but can't explain why it's there. Because if life existence is time plus matter plus chance, and it sustains life through evolution, then how do you account for altruism? Because altruism totally undermines that entire theory of existence. How do you account for altruism? He set out on this path, and kind of like Lewis did when he set out on a path to question the existence of God, he was overcome by the overwhelming presence of God and became Christian. And this happened to George Price too. He became completely overwhelmed with the fact that altruism must point to the presence and the existence of God. Otherwise, there's no explanation for altruism. And if that's the case, then there can't be time plus matter plus chance. There could only be a created order. And if that's the case, created order lives by the hand of God, doesn't evolve from a goo to the zoo to you. that it is sovereignly held by a creator God. And George Price lived the last quarter of his life totally sold out in the Charing Cross area of London, serving those who were most disenfranchised by the culture that had disenfranchised them, simply because they were relegated as expendable people. And George lived the rest of his life serving these people. I hope this morning, when we talk about the sanctity of human life, we're not talking about the value. We're talking about the sanctification, set apart wholly unto God, human life. And then when we look at each other, and I do, the last thing I mean by that is each other in this room. I mean each other as human beings out there, especially when we look at the unsaved. The only thing that we should see is one made in the likeness and image of God. And there's only one of two ways that they can live. They can either live as a brother or a sister who can share in discipleship, or as someone who is unredeemed that needs evangelism. Made in the likeness and image, and desirous of either discipleship or in need of evangelism. That's how God sees his created order. That's how God sees his creation. And then he calls you to be your brother's keeper. And if you say, hey, not my backyard, not my brother. That's not how Jesus said it. Who are my brothers? Who are my... Hey, Jesus. Jesus is just raised a man from who was crippled, who had been lowered through a hole in the roof, and Jesus' mother and his brothers and sisters had come to collect him because in Scripture they thought he had gone crazy. And somebody comes to the door into the room where Jesus is sitting, and he says, Jesus, your mother and your brother are here, and your sister's here to collect you. And he says, who are my mother, my brothers, my sisters? These. When as Jesus looks at each of us, we are all bound in the brotherhood of those made and the sisterhood of those made in the likeness and image of God. And if we do not see each other the way God sees his creation, then we have violated at the level of asking God, am I my brother's keeper? It's a dangerous place for us to live. If we don't have a good handle on this, the world does not come to this conclusion. The only way that we can come to this conclusion is by the revelation of Christ within us, that you were created by a creator, a loving creator God, made in his likeness and image, and placed in this earth to reflect his glory. And if that's not an absolute, non-negotiable, foundational stone in our Christian worldview, we're going to get a whole lot else really wrong about how we live a very pretentious claim to a Christian life and a Christian walk. When we talk about the sanctity of life, we're not talking about just abortion. We're talking about all human life. And we're not talking about the value of life. We're talking about life set apart wholly unto God as his created order. Now, if that's not a part of our Christian worldview, we're missing it. We need to close here this morning. Other thoughts before we wrap up?
Todd?
Yes, sir.
Up until about 15 years ago, the theory royals married royals throughout Europe was there, but the cycle was broken a little bit in England, but many other European countries still believe that.
Still believe that, yeah. And it was broken in England to the aghast of the world, and still to the ostracization.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Repurifying the line, as they would say, is critical. Yeah, and we shouldn't be too horribly you all may not have experienced this. I experienced it. When I was in college, and I didn't date actually at all. Gail was the only person that I dated when I was in college, and that was at the very end of my collegiate career. I was way too much of a poor student, focused on getting out of my college in the 5 years that my college required of me, in order to get out and start making money, because I'm going in debt fast going to school, and so I didn't have time or money for girls, and so I didn't. But I knew a lot who were, and there was lots of conversations. And if I heard it once, I heard it 1,000 times. Oh, I'm not going to date him because he won't make pretty babies. It was 1,000 different ways that it's said, but that was the analysis. Who am I? Who of this collegiate that I can select a husband from that will produce pretty babies?
Which fraternity?
Yeah, the fraternity. Yeah. Now that we did the exact same. It's been totally ingrained into our lives, and it is a hard beating of us to get this out of our minds, to begin to see each other the way God created us and the way God sees us, the way God values us. I'll go back to, for me personally, and I tell myself this all the time, to see the world as God sees the world, to see each other as God sees us, to value what he values, to devalue what he devalues, to honor what he honors, dishonor what he dishonors, and to see the world as he calls me to see it. I have to repeat that to myself over and over and over again, because I know how easy it is for me to slide way back into the ways and means of the world. Other thoughts before we close this morning? Brad, you open this. Can you close us in prayer this morning?
Heavenly Father, thank you for your words through Todd. If we think we're settled, change that. Challenge us, Father, and then enable us to respond to that challenge. Help us to examine ourselves deeply. And then, Father, ask you in life when you can make whatever change or changes that need to be made in us, in the way we think, the way we learn, the way we see the world, and then in what we do. Father, trusting that your hand is good, your hand will guide, your hand will direct, and your hand will protect. Send us forth from this place to honor you. In Jesus' name I ask.